So hi Stuart, it's Adam asking you some questions. We've covered 9 questions on wisdom. What would be nice right now is for us to do a recap on those questions and pull out the gold, so to speak. What do you think?
Yeah, do it.
Okay, do you want to be wise? That was the first question. What are your thoughts now?
Yeah, so I guess it's good to start at the beginning, isn't it? If you're going to think about wisdom and how to develop it and what it means and how it's relevant to your life, then starting out asking that question, why, is a good place to start. So I think what was great about that conversation for me, we were both making conscious the fact that we do want to be wise, and actually making that conscious intention, I think is really, even if it feels a bit old-fashioned or a bit awkward in some ways, it's still a really positive thing to do. And then fundamentally, the other part of that conversation we had was, if that's the intention, we do want to develop wisdom as we go through our life, how? Then for me, the fundamental takeaway point from that podcast conversation was that we develop wisdom by learning from our own experience. It's a very particular type of learning. It's an emotional, psychological learning that changes us, and we learn from experience. That's very simple. That's the foundation, and that's where I think we started from in the rest of the conversations.
For me, wisdom allows for society to prosper and continue. The individual is wise, the community is wise, and then the world at large is wise. So it's really essential.
I agree, and we talked about that. I really like that point you made in the podcast conversation, was that why do we want to become wise? Well, it's because it's helpful. It's helpful for us. It's helpful for other people, and we all benefit from it, and we need as much of it as possible. So yeah, it's worth doing. Let's set the intention to do it. How do we do it? Fundamentally, we're open to learning from our experience, and I think that's a great place to start off. Absolutely.
That's great wisdom. Let's go to question 2. How much do you feel alive?
Yeah, second podcast we talked about, I guess it was fundamentally about sensitivity, wasn't it? That kind of being switched on to how we feel, the emotional experience of life. And what does it mean to live? It means to be conscious, to be switched on, to be aware, and to have feelings. And it's all too easy to cut off from our feelings at times. But if you're going to learn from experience and understand something about yourself, your experience, you can't learn what you're cut off from. You can't learn what you're not conscious of. You can't learn what you numb yourself to emotionally. So the conversation in that session was around the importance of having feelings, but also being able to reflect on those feelings, like having kind of an emotional experience that's conscious, that's reflective, but fundamentally to be in touch with how it feels to be alive is, I guess, a foundational quality of being in this process we're thinking about.
Yes, and it also allows you to tap into your fullness so that you're really connected to all your available resources. We're not just in the thinking part of our brain, we're connecting with our gut, our intuition. So it's more of a whole body experience. You're living life to the full.
I love that point about, if you get out your head, then it's like your whole of your humanity, the physical side of it, your instincts, your unconscious mind. You engage fully when you're sensitive, how it feels in your body emotionally as well. And yeah, instincts and intuition, that's part of it, which you don't typically have if you're just stuck in your head. So let's be sensitive for sure.
Yeah. Question 3, we came to, how important is it to be realistic? Realism.
The key thing there was that, and this is drawing a little bit on like Buddhist ways of thinking, when you suffer, a way of thinking about suffering is that it's telling you something important, that there's something within you, within us, an expectation, an attitude, an assumption, etc., that's out of kilter with reality. And the more our expectations are misaligned with reality, the more we'll suffer. But the same is also true. The way we expect things to be is more aligned with the way things actually are, either in this present moment or in our life generally over time, over the years, for example. Then the more we're not fighting against our experience so much. And then the more we can appreciate it, and the more joy we feel, and the more understanding we have, and the more things make sense, because we're less out of balance, out of kilter, fighting, resisting, misaligned with the reality of what it is to be human. That's what we talked about in that session, that point.
Yes, I agree, Stuart. Particularly assumptions and expectations that you mentioned. We all live with assumptions and expectations. And when we let go of those and we live in reality, life gets so much simpler. We don't have the disappointments because we don't have an expectation of outcomes. So much of our lives, we want an outcome in a particular way, and we can let go of that because we accept reality for what it is.
I guess when things happen organically, then they can be surprising and wonderful and joyful and wow, like what's happens organically, which is a joy as well, isn't it?
Enjoying the spontaneity of the moment.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Here is a question, number 4. Where are you at in your life?
So this was a conversation about the journey through the stages of life, essentially from childhood through to old age and death. And we're on this journey, and on this journey of life, there's dilemmas, there's conflicts, and there's challenges, because we need to change. The personality that we are consciously when we're young doesn't work when we become adults. We need to change, but that process is difficult. And there's a stage we're perhaps leaving behind us and a stage we might be moving towards. And in that, if you ask yourself where you're at, you might find a place where you're stuck, some resistance to growing up, something you don't want to let go of from an earlier part of your life, etc. And we were thinking about, well, it's a kind of hard process to go through, because sometimes you don't know quite who the future you is going to be, how you're going to develop and grow, but you have to still let go of something about the way you are in your life now. And it's hard. Part of you has to die and kind of cease and fade and become disempowered before another part of you can emerge and grow. Yeah, we were talking about how that's challenging and how we can get support with that, but kind of being aware of where you're at in that process and where you need to develop to be fully living the next stage of your life. That level of consciousness, level of self-awareness is really important.
That maturation process and recognizing that each life stage brings its own gifts. And if we're going to enjoy the benefits of each life stage, then we have to step fully into that next life stage and let go of what we have to let go of.
Yeah.
So it is important. And question 5 was around, how do you feel about uncertainty?
And being out of your comfort zone, wasn't it? That was the thing about the uncertainty, was you're not in a comfort zone of knowing where you stand, etc. And a bit of a truism, isn't it? If you grow, what you find difficult in life makes you stronger. Kind of talked about that. And when there's an experience that doesn't conform with the sense of who we are and we're outside of our comfort zone, then there's something to be understood there in that discomfort, something to be unpacked, something to be made sense of, so that we can change. We tend not to change when we're in our comfort zones and things are easy. Truths about emotional or psychological truths, or the truth of a relationship or something we've been avoiding, to become aware of it, can sometimes come with anxiety. So the tolerance of frustration, anxiety, uncertainty, etc. is an important part. You need to be able to be uncomfortable, to be able to grow and learn from experience.
You do. I feel, uncertainty, discomfort is really that call to change, a call of personal growth. Unless we actually accept the call, that discomfort is going to just stay inside us until we actually respond. So it is an important aspect. And wake up to, what am I being asked of right now?
I guess that's where this reflection is helpful, because oftentimes when things feel uncomfortable, you naturally want to back away from it. Or I feel a bit anxious or a bit uncomfortable now. I want to get back into my comfort zone. That's a natural reaction. But if you're willing to stay with it, another way of approaching it is, what can I learn from this? How am I going to grow from this? What's this uncomfortableness telling me that I can learn from? And that's a much more mature attitude to have, and really helpful.
Question 6, how do you think about the journey of personal development?
In that podcast, we talked about having a system of ideas. I think many people for hundreds or thousands of years have had a kind of philosophy or a belief system or a tradition that provides a system of ideas for thinking about the development of how to live, how to go through the process of life, how to suffer less and live life with integrity, etc., and have a quality of life. But today, there isn't an off-the-shelf system that works or feels relevant to the majority of us. So there's an opportunity there for each of us to develop a set of ideas that can help us work through this process, contain our anxiety so they don't overwhelm us, inspire us, give some optimism that we're not alone in this process. Other people have done it before. There's a direction of travel, and there are rewards on the way as well. So what we were saying was that if each of us researches and looks for ideas and reflects on them, and find a system of ideas that genuinely relates to our own experience and feels meaningful and valuable and powerful ideas because they relate to our experience. And so we know that they're not just an intellectual thing or a belief thing. And we end up with our own philosophy or our own system of ideas for our process of development. That's a really helpful thing to consciously do and to say, these are the ideas that I'm living by.
I mentioned by way of example the hero's journey as one method. It's a roadmap. We have something to navigate these life changes by, and we can place ourselves, where am I on that roadmap right now? It is important to have a system of ideas.
Yeah, I think so. I also talked about, say, mindfulness, meditation, psychotherapy, and also the work of Joseph Campbell in The Hero's Journey. I've kind of drawn on ideas from these traditions. In my own life, I've made those ideas my own, and I relate them to my own experience, and that's different from just being Buddhist or just seeing the world through the eyes of a psychotherapist, what have you. Taking the particular ideas that work for you and making them your own, as you've done.
Yeah, recognizing that your uniqueness.
Yeah.
And question 7 was, what do you think about humility?
I think we both kind of intuitively felt it was an important quality, and we explored why. We thought a bit about self-importance and how that can get in the way of developing wisdom. And the quality of humility we were thinking about was actually kind of being more receptive and dominant to controlling, being open-minded, sensitive, allowing some space for not knowing, for uncertainty, for some ambivalence. And there's a humility in not jumping to an answer and not even believing our personal views and opinions too concretely, but stepping back a bit from that and seeing what happens. It takes an awful lot of confidence to be able to be humble in that way, rather than just kind of go straight to self-importance or go straight to believing your own views and opinions too quickly. That kind of confidence is important, the confidence not to know, not to have an answer. We talked a bit about that sometimes when we are self-important, it's because there's scared of or avoiding kind of what the opposite of that feels like. You know, feeling potentially, if we're insecure about feeling any sense of weakness or failure or insignificance or not knowing, if we're kind of scared of that experience, then we overcompensate and we become very self-important and opinionated people. But if you can work through that insecurity and let yourself be confident in your not knowing and your disempowerment in one sense, then it helps us, what we're talking about in other podcasts, I think it helps to kind of be in touch with the greater part of our humanity, our sensitivity, our intuition, our instinct. But it takes a bit of ego, humility, to be open to the bigger experience of what it is to be human.
Yes, humility is a sign of maturity, isn't it? Able to surrender to what is, to trust, to be patient. And fundamentally, as you just said, it's that ability to balance your own self-interest with the common good.
Absolutely.
Question 8. Where is my conscience?
Yeah, so in this podcast, we thought about kind of conscience as related to integrity. So this quality of impersonal integrity is that you live by your morals. It seems right and wrong to you. That's how you live and you act. And I think the point we said is that to have integrity, you need to have the sensitivity we were talking about earlier, be switched on to your conscience. You need to have some moral autonomy to be able to kind of think for yourself, not just go with a majority judgment on an issue. And you need to have personal maturity, because the sense that we have, the judgment we make about what's right and wrong, can easily be undermined or it's fickle. Because if we're cut off from our feelings, if we can cut off from our conscience, then we can do what we want. So we can turn it on and off, and we can apply it to this group but not that group. If we just go with the majority view on something, then it's easy. We don't need to think particularly hard about what's right or wrong, because we just say, well, everyone judges this as right, so it must be right. And if we're not mature or reflective, then our own insecurities and paranoia or our immaturity, we can persuade ourselves and deceive ourselves that something's right when it's only right because we're in a very infantile, threatened, or backed in a corner state of mind. So really this sensitivity to how we feel, courage and autonomy and self-awareness to be able to admit to yourself when you're judging from a place of immaturity. This is work needed to be able to live with integrity. And in the heart of that endeavor is the thing of staying with your conscience, like staying with that feeling, that internal barometer of, how to live.
Yeah, you've really got to the essence of who you are and found a connection to your own individual truth. The authenticity comes to mind. It's wholeness.
Interesting, I think we said that the word integrity itself has two meanings: to live by your morals,
Yes.
what you judge right and wrong, or what you judge to be right, is one definition of integrity. And then the other use of the word is to be integrated, to be whole or integrated. And it's that idea that if you're psychologically integrated, you're not massively repressing parts of yourself and projecting and caught up in infantile dynamics and such as kind of paranoia, blaming or castigating a particular group of people or what have you. If you're mature enough and integrated enough not to be caught up in those psychological fragmented kind of ways of being, then you can have that kind of moral integrity, but the kind of psychological integrity is important in that mix.
I think so. Our last question was, what does belonging mean to you?
We talked about that we all kind of have an instinct, we want to belong, and that it feels great to belong somewhere, and there to be bonds of trust and kind of attachment. And it's an archetype from a family unit or a tribal unit, so it's an evolved need that we have or desire that we have. But it's not the only dynamic that happens in groups, so it's fragile, and those bonds of trust compete in groups with systems of control. The way that groups can fragment, and you can have subgroups, and groups can behave very unintelligently, can very easily scapegoat one person to idealize another person, and cliques within the bigger group can kind of identify with one party or the other. And this is common in group dynamics. And then you have your kind of individual integrity and balance between, or the tension between individual integrity and the value of being bonded and connected with other people, that sense of belonging. Navigating those two requires an awful lot of maturity and wisdom, really, because sometimes your integrity will lead you to falling out of line with the majority view or the unspoken rules of the group. But you have to be mindful as well that there's value and great value in belonging and trust and bond and connectedness and mutual benefit. So we talked about the importance of being conscious of these opposing needs within us, for integrity versus belonging.
Yes, and we mentioned when those needs weren't being met by being in a group, having that courage to step out and consider the individual aspect of that scenario.
And it's an art form, isn't it? It's an art form to be individuated, to be able to have your own thoughts and your own judgments and your own reflection, whether it conforms with the group view or not. But also be in the group and also be there for the benefit of the group and be facing the same direction and be there for mutual benefit. It's an art form to manage both, but it's something we should aspire to, because there's a lot to be gained by working collectively, clearly, but yet the way we work collectively is often not very intelligent or not intelligent at all. So we have to kind of be mindful of those risks. And I think bring our integrity as much of it as we can into those groups, even if we're risking some threatening of the group's fictions or its ideology or what have you.
As you say, Stuart, it's an art form. It's balancing the needs of the individual with the needs of the group. It's really a form of enlightened self-interest and cooperative competition.
And it's ultimately helpful for groups to have individuals, like individuated individuals with integrity within the group. It's helpful for the group if the group can accommodate that integrity of individual people. Some groups can, some groups can't, if they find it too threatening. But if they can, it's ultimately better for the group.
Well, those were the 9 questions, Stuart. Thank you for that.
Now we're wrapping up, and this is the final podcast in this series. When you look back over these, we did a very brief introductory podcast, and then we had these 9 themes and questions that we discussed and thought about. These seem valuable questions to me. For us, it's been valuable and really helpful for me, and I think for you as well, to have this conversation, and whether we record it or not, actually, to have the conversation. And I think it would be helpful, for anyone really, friends, colleagues, associates, anyone that has a kind of interest in personal development or wisdom or learning from experience, or however you phrase it, to go through a similar process. I think actually, what do I think is most important? Do these themes we've been talking about resonate? Are there other ideas that they might want to discuss and reflect on? And research and read about and share ideas. I think it's a helpful thing that anyone can do, really. Do you think
I,
that's true?
I do think it's true. It is a good idea because these are questions you don't normally ask yourself. They're like the deep existential questions of life. And it's a struggle to jump in and find an answer. But having this conversation that we've had has certainly broadened my thinking and challenged me. It ultimately given me a greater level of self-awareness.
I mean, maybe it's the end as well, getting into that state of being or state of mind where we're self-aware and reflective and switched on and feeling life and understanding our experience, particularly when it's difficult, but also when it's joyful and appreciating. We have understanding or breakthroughs, or things become simpler because we're not fighting against life so much. And for me, as a psychotherapist and as a coach and as a mindfulness and meditation teacher, I certainly encourage anyone listening to this to have these conversations with their own friends or family or kind of colleagues or have you. But also, if anybody wanted to have a conversation with me or share their thoughts or their thinking, or actually kind of go through a similar conversation about what does it mean to develop like a system of ideas that work for you, that you can then explore and relate back to experience and make meaningful. If anybody wanted to do that with me, then do get in touch. And broadly speaking, be happy to kind of replicate this either on a one-to-one basis or possibly in a group setting, potentially with Adam if you were interested. Because I think this is maybe a really valuable experience that we can share and help other people go through as well.
I'm definitely interested, Stuart. Thank you. Yeah, I'd just like to say I found this to be a very valuable experience. I've learnt a great deal. I found the questions to be thought-provoking. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversations. So, really a big thank you for asking me to come along and explore this topic of wisdom. It's been fabulous. Thank you.